Bienvenue sur Ici Beyrouth. Nous sommes aujourd'hui en compagnie de l'ancien sous-secrétaire d'État des États-Unis, M. David Schenker. Welcome on Ici Beyrouth, Mr. Schenker. We're so glad to have you with us on this exclusive interview for Ici Beyrouth.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
We'd like to start with a few questions. So first of all, I would like to ask you questions about the U.S. sanctions. So when will the new U.S. sanction be imposed on Lebanese politicians?
Well, I'm not in the administration anymore, so I can't tell you what the administration is going to do. I know that when I was in the Trump administration, we had a series of designations that we were going to make, and then we made a few, and the Biden administration appears to be following the same policy. They launched a set of sanctions that were consistent with what we did in October. So I'd expect more, but I couldn't tell you when.
I have another question that's also related to this topic. So you know that the parliamentary elections are coming soon. I'd like to know how the people that are running for parliament are going to be able to fund their campaign and have access to their financial estate while they're sanctioned. How would that work for them?
I don't know what people like Gibran Bassil are going to do. I mean, they've got a political party behind them that presumably has some funding, although I don't know if these FPM funds are commingled at all with the SEALs funds. But these are probably out of reach of the United States government. In other words, when we designate, we attach accounts that we can get to. And I don't think Gibran Bassil has accounts in the United States, so I don't know if we've seized anything.
Well, speaking of Gibran Bassil, do you think he'll be able to lift the sanctions that are imposed on him? Will he be able to have a recourse or have a way of getting them lifted?
Well, there is recourse. Anyone can, there's a process where you can lawyer and go through a process in the United States, ask to see the evidence that is gathered against you. But these packages are compiled by Treasury. They are large amounts of information that's gathered over time and reviewed by a series of lawyers to ensure they meet a certain standard. So it's oftentimes very difficult to get removed from or delisted.
So would you say you have a very solid case against him?
Yeah, I think it's a convincing package, just like the packages against Yusuf Llanos and Hassan Khalil and sure, like the one that was prepared against Jamil Sayed, Danny Hori, and Kanalar.
Would that minimize his chances of becoming president?
Well, that's for the Lebanese people to decide. You know, the United States doesn't say who Lebanon's president can't be. But it seems to me that the Lebanese people have a very serious problem with corruption in their country. And the United States designated Gibran Bassil, among others, under the global Magnitsky sanctions for corruption. So if the Lebanese people decide that they want to elect somebody that the United States has determined is corrupt, and who, by the way, I think an enormous number of Lebanese believe it's corrupt as well, then that's their decision. But there are consequences for that.
Okay, what would those consequences be, for example?
Well, I think that you're not going to have a chief executive of Lebanon who's designated for corruption coming to visit the United States, for example. Although, the United States has dealt with the Lebanese government that periodically had ministers that were Hezbollah. You know that March 14th was for a period of time in coalition government with Hezbollah. There were ministers who were Hezbollah, and the United States government worked still with those ministries, but just not with those ministers.
Well, I know that the U.S. administration considers Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So how would you explain that the French, mainly President Macron, is actually having a conversation with Hezbollah currently, especially after the Beirut blast? How would you describe this initiative?
Well, this has been a long-standing relationship that the French have this fiction that there is a political wing and a military wing of Hezbollah. Hezbollah itself denies that. I think Naim Qassem has said that Hezbollah is a bird. You need both wings to fly. There's no separation. But the French believe in that fiction. And we've talked to them about that. Other states and countries in Europe have moved away from that, and other countries around the world. But this is a certain French predilection, and I don't think it's particularly productive. If you want to get another government, and certainly Hezbollah is a major political force and military force in Lebanon outside the control of the central government. But if you talk about reform, about a new type of Lebanese government that is committed to reform, fighting corruption, if you're wanting to get Hezbollah to once again be part of that system with their partners who perpetrated this type of corruption and help drive Lebanon into the financial ruin it is today, that doesn't seem to me to be a productive avenue to take.
Then what are your thoughts about the European mechanism that was put into place? Well, it wasn't fully adopted, on imposing sanctions on Lebanese politicians.
Yeah, well, we heard from President Macron right after the port blast that France would be designating Lebanese who were obstructing government formation and undermining efforts for reform. And we've not seen any of those sanctions. There are allegedly a small handful of travel bans for some Lebanese individuals or political elites, so they can't go to France. But France still has not gone public with who those particular Lebanese officials are. I think that, if you're going to threaten and you're not going to follow through, obviously, Lebanese political elites who are corrupt or are obstructing the reforms that would allow Lebanon to get an IMF program and help get out of this financial disaster that is basically hurting so many Lebanese. I think that it's not an effective strategy to cajole and keep on meeting with these people and there not be any consequences. We're already more than a year after the port blast, and we're still basically in the same situation. If you read the last IMF report, it doesn't appear that they're making a great deal of progress moving forward toward these reforms.
Then what would you say about the U.S. administration right now? So would Biden administration have a tougher approach to sanctions than the previous administration, in your opinion?
I wouldn't say tougher at all. I mean, they've got negotiations with the Iranians going on right now. And the last time this happened during the Obama administration, I think we saw the administration back off of putting pressure on Hezbollah, et cetera, and Iranian proxies in order to create a better environment for negotiations. That didn't really work out too well. But no, I expect that this administration will eventually move ahead with additional sanctions against Lebanese political elites who are corrupt, who are undermining reform, who are allied with Hezbollah, and basically causing the suffering of the continued suffering of the Lebanese people. I don't think they're going to be tougher. I think that they will be, as they have been to date, probably consistent with where the last administration was on the sanctions. At the same time, that they are pursuing a policy of humanitarian support, just like the previous administration did. That is support for World Bank's social safety net program, feeding 1.82 million Lebanese, providing humanitarian support, and now they're creating a new mechanism to try and fund directly via cash stipend the Lebanese armed forces to prevent that from being from destabilized or further defections that would destabilize potentially the country. There's a debate here in Washington about the wisdom of that, but this is what this administration is doing for the vast majority of this is consistent with what the Trump administration did.
But would you say that Biden's administration is currently distancing itself from Lebanon because of the negotiations?
No, I don't see that at all. You saw that the administration increased the amount of money it's giving to the LAF. It upped something like by $67 million. That was supposed to be weapons purchases to the LAF, in addition to the $120 million they're already giving them. And now they're going to Congress to try and use this to pay stipends not only to the LAF, but to the ISF. This is something that I think is unprecedented. And once again, there's a debate here in Washington about the wisdom of this. But no, that's not distancing Lebanon at all. Amos Hochstein just visited, is trying very hard to get a maritime border agreement between Lebanon and Israel. I think they're pretty involved, actually.
What are your thoughts on, since you just mentioned Mr. Hochstein, what are your thoughts on the Lebanese position today?
Well, there's a couple things. You have a move or maybe some flexibility that the Lebanese, who when I was in government came in with this 29 maximalist line, now being willing to perhaps go back to 23, exactly, which was pretty maximalist in the first place. In terms of exactly what they filed at the UN some years earlier. And there was a debate because the Israelis obviously have a line that's further north. So it seems to me that the strategy was to go maximalist so they can get their original demand. It's striking in how obvious it is. That said, I don't know if Hezbollah or the other powers that be in Lebanon will let this go ahead. As you know, Hezbollah's raison d'etre is largely the resistance, and you can't resist if the enemy isn't occupying your territory. So I think Hezbollah has a good reason to want to keep a lot of tension going with Israel. On the other hand, this is a country, Lebanon, with no money, no financial reserves, very few financial prospects to get back on the right track, and there may be natural gas reserves in blocks 8, 9, and 10. So I think there's some impetus to move forward with this. The other thing that we've heard in the rumor mill, and of course Lebanon is brimming with rumors, is that somehow that the elements of the Lebanese government want to include a package here for border demarcation that includes the delisting of Gibran Bassil as corrupt. And I can't imagine that any U.S. administration would agree to that type of horse trading. But we'll see where it goes. I think Hochstein said that he's willing to wait another couple weeks, but then he's going to disengage.
Okay, let's move on to the upcoming elections. So there are talks about the elections being postponed or even cancelled. So what would be the U.S. position if this scenario came to happen?
Well, I heard a statement of Dorothy Shea, the U.S. ambassador in Beirut, who said that this would be unacceptable. And I don't know, exactly what that means. It seems to me that it's a distinct possibility. And there's still some debate about expatriate voting or the impact that will have, or whether people will show up, whether they're going to spend their money to go back to their home districts to vote at such a difficult time, what the level of participation would be. And then, of course, whether this opposition will coalesce. In any event, I'm not so sanguine that elections will make a great deal of difference. Well, you recall that the March 14th coalition won victories in 2005 and 2009, and Hezbollah responded to government initiatives by invading Beirut and shooting up Oraitem. Hezbollah has very little respect for the results of ballot boxes. They're more, I think, invested in bullets. So it's unclear to me that it's going to make any difference for Lebanon, regrettably.
And what about the lack of respect for the Lebanese army? We heard Mr. Hassan Nasrallah's last speech. He attacked openly the Lebanese army. What are your comments?
He's one speechless. Obviously, Hezbollah, which is known here in the United States as a state within a state, they have very little regard for state institutions. Now, Lebanon is not a country that is known for its strong institutions. But if there is one that is cross-sectarian, that I think represents, historically has represented both national interest, stability in the state, and the pride of the country, that would be the Lebanese Armed Forces, which is one of the last remaining and popular institutions in the country. And Hezbollah has no regard for state institutions because its whole being has been predicated on the fact that the state does not have any weight or authority over them. They want the state to represent internationally, to bring in international aid, and they want to operate independently to answer sovereign questions for Lebanon about issues of war and peace, issues of freedom of speech, who can say what, and who can be killed on their orders. Whether this is on the anniversary of the assassination of Rafiq Hariri, whether it's Rafiq Hariri, whether it's Lokman Sleen, they have carte blanche. There is no accountability for Hezbollah. They like it that way.
What would be your recommendation for the Lebanese state and the Lebanese people?
Well, listen, it's hard for me to tell the Lebanese people what to do. When they go to the streets, when they talk out about the negative role that Hezbollah and their Free Patriotic Movement partners are playing in driving state into ruin, the response has often been violence, assassination, car bombings. So it's very difficult to tell people to exercise their freedom of speech and to go out and vote and to resist the sort of tyranny of this Iranian proxy in their country. But the country has to, I think, move away from these corrupt political elites, as hard as it is to do that, and move toward an IMF program, toward transparency, toward anti-corruption, and toward reform. And otherwise, the state will be finished. Here in the United States, when you say that Lebanon is a failing state, oftentimes people respond, no, it's not failing, it has failed. Now, I don't know what a failed state looks like in Lebanon, but the trajectory is not good, and there still does not appear to be an appropriate sense of urgency with 90% of the people below the poverty line. It's hard to tell people what to do, but they have to support a leadership and unify around these principles, I think, to get out of this disastrous spiral.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schenker, for giving us this amazing interview. Vous pouvez retrouver l'intégralité de l'interview sur les réseaux sociaux listés au bas de votre écran.